Good afternoon, fellow citizens. Welcome to the Citizens Chat Show. My name is Masesa Demiano, your show host for this conversation. And today we're going to discuss the State of the Nation address. It just happened a few days ago, and joined on the panel to discuss the State of the Nation and much more. I'm joined by Godbar Tumushabe. Godbar Tumushabe is the Associate Director with the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. Godbar, you're welcome.
Thank you, Damian, and good to be here.
Yeah, interesting, and we'll need to know much about the coffee and what happens around that business.
Yeah.
And following is Dr. Sarah Bireete. Dr. Sarah Bireete is the Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. Sarah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Damian.
Yeah, and the regular panelist with us here. Followed is Andrew Karamagi. He's an activist and a lawyer. Andrew, you're welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. And finally is Jacob Eyeru, who is the chairperson of the National Youth Council. Jacob, you're welcome.
Thank you, Damian, and it's a pleasure to be here.
And a representative of the junta on this panel.
Just to say, and a member of the NRA.
A representative of the junta.
maybe to start from there with Jacob.
Yes.
Of course, we know the State of the Nation address is a constitutional obligation in Article 101, where the president reports the status of the country, and but also unveils the government's agenda and what is going to happen in the coming years. From that from the address, did the address really meet your expectations?
Thank you, Damian. I think that my expectations was, of course, plainly put, first discuss the state of the country. And in his opening, the president was able to give us an update that the country has now entered the middle income status from the lower level. And in that update, he also clarified that we are able to be declared as such if we sustain it for 3 years. And I think that's a good start. That's a state that we have just entered, because as recently as January, he was saying we might not hit it because of COVID, but our recovery rate as an economy has been astonishing. It has been more than many economies have managed. So in that sense, it did meet that idea. But the president also did acknowledge the challenges of the economy that are artificially caused, the inflation that is now in the country, that is rising, especially on the situation of the global crisis, one of the post-pandemic crisis, but two of the scenarios around the Ukrainian war, with major economic powers imposing sanctions, supply routes being affected, and the world having critical shortages on commodities that provide for daily basics. That's why you have a high rise in commodity prices. And so the president also gave attention to that. But over the whole, the president's State of the Nation addresses have been structured. And they have been structured, in my assessment, to represent 3 forms. One, to speak about the prolonged struggle that Uganda is on, to transform itself into a structured vehicle of development. Number 2, the historical challenges of Uganda. And then number 3, which is really, for me, a very important issue, the geopolitical location of Uganda. So in terms of that, the president, apart from just adding on, he always has an update based on the prolonged journey of our development, the prolonged structure. That's why he has a lot of history. But then he proceeds to talk about the geopolitical environment of Uganda. And finally, like I said, he also now brings up the issues that continually happen. How are we leading on a journey of development? And that's where I think the conversation of coffee also came in. So to start this conversation, I think I was satisfied that he brought out the issues about my position on what he said exactly on some of the issues. I think we'll pick it up in the conversation.
Yeah, interesting. Andrew, I need to pick each one of your minds on this area first as a kickstart. Did the address meet your expectations?
The word president comes from
one of the root words is preside. The word preside is a verb, can also be an adverb. And we're told in school that verbs are action words. If you say dance, it's an action.
Those of long time ago, we have forgotten verbs, pronouns,
And verbs and so on.
Okay, I hear you.
Now, the point I want to make is that even before we get to the address, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, I don't feel led. Because the person who should preside, out of which the word president comes, is not presiding, he is complaining. I don't know what to do with the person who occupies that office. The only person in the Constitution under Chapter 7 who is referred to as Commander-in-Chief, Chief Executive, First Citizen, Head of State, President, all these titles are conferred on only one individual at a time in the country.
Fountain of honor.
Fountain of honor. For you to have such a position and come to television to lament about people stealing and then talking in a casual manner as though you are addressing a gathering of, a family gathering of sorts, is the height of disrespect. So I cannot delve into substance when there was none, because the so-called head of state was lamenting, was complaining. It's not enough to say, we're going to resolve. How? What exactly have you done? Roads are blocked for you. You do not spend on anything. You're given protection of, first rate protection and all these comforts, so that the only work you have to do is to worry about the welfare, the well-being, and the dignity of the citizens that you purportedly lead. Finally, in opening, as someone who belongs to the bulk of the population of Uganda, I think there is a serious lack of attachment to the situation in which we find ourselves. And I'm aware of my own privilege coming to this show, speaking. People are being evicted from homes. They cannot pay rent. Fuel for cars is out of the question. I realize that I own a car, but I'm speaking over the heads of most people who certainly don't own cars. Basic commodities are going through the roof. This song has been sung, and there's no, as a young person, I don't feel that there's a government that cares about my fate, my dignity, or my well-being, much less welfare. It's a parasitic state that only comes to take away from me. In essence, I am over-governed but underserved. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting from Karamagi. Sarah, if we have to go back to the 2021 address, the president talked of the focus on 4 key areas. He talked of commercial agriculture, he talked of industries, services, and ICT. Each year that comes, there are areas of focus. But from this address, do you feel that this past year, the issues he talked about were how the government has really worked on them as a focus?
The first major or fundamental problem with the nature of what we call State of Nations address, I think for me what remains is the name. But if you look at the structure and the substance, or discussed the written copy in another country, I think citizens would laugh at us to find it's like a folk song. And then we are calling it the State of Nation address. In simple terms, the State of Nation address must be an executive accountability of the state of the country, socially, economically, politically, environment, ICT, employment levels. Do you get these elements in that story? I don't think so. Then after giving that report, to say in the last year, we said we shall do the following. This is how far we've gone. And in this year, we are focusing on this. And these are the measures we are taking. You don't get that. And the biggest time for that storytelling was spent on the economy. But as a country, we have failed to clear a position where our economy is and where we want it to go and what we must do, other than sloganeering. Rosto summarizes stages of development for national economies: traditional society, pre-takeoff stage, takeoff, drive to maturity, and mass consumption. If you look at the characteristics at each of these stages, our economy is still at pre-takeoff. We are beginning to appreciate science, and indeed the speech talks about the salary enhancement for science teachers. Again, we are still talking about the vaccine for COVID since since COVID broke out. Even we do not have an accountability of what stage is it and where, and what more needs to be done. But we are beginning to appreciate science. That's pre-takeoff stage. We are also beginning to say we need to produce enough food. You can see part of the economic crisis that we say is foreign, but it is partly national for lack of our preparedness. Yes, something has happened somewhere in Ukraine, but we are unable to import the 40% grain that comes from Ukraine. But whose problem is it? Africa has the largest chunk of fertile soils, has the largest share of fresh waters, has the biggest share of productive labor. So why should we lament about 40% grain that should come from Ukraine? Isn't it our primary problem that we cannot produce the food and we must import it? If you look at the employment crisis, does the statement tell us how many people have lost jobs, how many jobs have been created, and how many more jobs we can create? It doesn't. If you look at the basic structure of the economy, a national economy must have element of local prosperity for local economies, employment skills, and competitiveness for business. Do you see that coming out in our structures and planning? The biggest lamentation was about the economies of developed countries. All these countries, they take your coffee and they make so much money. Yeah, this is the same speech that the president made since 1986.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say, that since I was a child.
Yes, this is what he has been saying, and young people might not know. Since 1996, he has been saying the same thing. And you have been in power for 36 years. Yeah. And you are still condemning countries that are able, have good leadership and are able to develop. The United Arab Emirates, which is 50 years old, because the 7 Emirates came together in 1971.
1.5 million people.
Yes. They are the 7th highest economy, now globally. Out of that leadership. They have existed for 50 years, you have existed for 36 years, you are still lamenting about basics of value addition. Isn't that a verdict on his failures as a leader? So I think really the informality with the State of Nation address, which I call storytelling, and the casual manner of addressing issues. And of course, the conclusion, I think people who still thought, from the time the anti-corruption day, when the president stopped the lifestyle audit that the IGG was proposing. So some people still maybe hoped that he has capacity to fight corruption. So I think that was also dashed when he talked about the Chinese investor. I know people who took bribes. I know how much they took, but I could not prosecute them because I had no evidence. What more evidence did you want? A bribery is about a give and a take. And you are lucky even to know the amount. And then you say you don't have evidence. I think for me that was an affirmation that you people, look, I cannot do anything about this thing. So to me, really, that's my take on this storytelling.
Interesting. Godbar.
In
Your thoughts?
That's what you would say.
Godbar, you remember last year, of course, you talked about fighting the people in the Ministry of Finance and the Attorney General's office over corruption tendencies. This time round, he comes out to the address and he talks about the people he knows, actually, even knows them, but only just, I think, lacks the evidence. What is your take on this, and especially for corruption?
No, but you see, I think first of all we need to understand that, especially for us Ugandans, including you guys who are of yesterday, this is a country that is 60 years old. Yeah, if we discount the
time of
pre-independence, where the country was fragmented into the different nationalities, we are now 60 years old this year. So, anybody, if Uganda was a biological being, we would now be that being would be going into retirement. Yeah, and you know what retirement means. Retirement, you only enjoy your retirement if you have done the right things, done the right investments, and you've been able to establish cash flows that are able to sustain you and sustain your quality of life in retirement. So I think it's always important for us as a country to remind ourselves that we've been around for 60 years now, independent. Secondly, President Museveni, I think that in all his speeches, right from around 1990, let me put it, give him like 2000. Those speeches are always, they're always littered with a lot of deception because they have been changing. So he used to talk about, 1986. So you account for the years you've been in power. If you have realized, you can see that he has now shifted and he talks about 1960. So in other words, he has been fighting and doing things since 1960. So he comes to give a State of the Nation address and he's telling us what he has done since 1960. I think that's deception. Yeah, that's a deception. And we need to understand that when a leader becomes deceptive, you can actually have problems as a country. It doesn't matter how smart people are, but the moment you have a leader who is not able to account for his time and be able to speak about it with a certain level of precision, and he flip-flops between 1986 and then 1970s and then 1960. I think the last time is when he said from the days of the Watebus. Yeah. So that's yeah. So that's really, for me, that's number 2. Number 3, I think I would just build on Sarah's point of saying Museveni's speeches today, they are speeches of explaining the problem. And this has been my quarrel with us Africans. Other nations, other people spend more time trying to solve the problems. Africans, we explain ourselves. So in other words, if you are not rich, you explain why you're not rich. You can't tell us what you are going to do to be rich. If you've not been able to add value to your coffee or to your other products, you explain why you have failed, why you have not done it. You are not talking about what you are going to do to be able to do it. So there's a lot of explaining of our problems. And that's also...
Is it a governance issue? Or
no, it's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of leadership. Just to add that the explaining of the problem also goes with adjusting into the problem. If something is a problem, you are able to adjust into it. So like these things like PDM, the ones Jacob has really talks about now, I call it adjusting into the problem. So you have a problem of subsistence, so everything becomes subsistence. Because PDM is almost subsistence. So you adjust into the problem. Fourthly, a State of the Nation address, I think as Andrew said, the State of the Nation address must be a State of the Nation address. You can't come to address the nation and you are talking casually. Yeah, I think it's disrespectful.
And address
Yeah?
casually.
Yes, you dress casually, you speak casually. It's disrespectful of the country, of the people. Museveni doesn't take our constitution seriously. No. In fact, he only uses it for convenience. Everything must be made convenient for him to be able to do his things. And I mean, one can give him credit for so many things he has done. Some of them he has attempted. But I think, and let me add and say that, you see, sometimes these speeches, we underrate them. But a State of the Nation address is supposed to inspire a people. As a leader, you talk about the possibilities of the future. The opportunities of the moment and the possibilities of the future. You are able to talk and project, and the young people are able to see that in the next 5-10 years, this is how the direction looks like. But you know, you're there, you're president, then you talk about, I met the other woman, she didn't know anything, and when we discussed, I thought she was serious. I mean, I'm telling you, I completely don't understand. You're a president. You're a president. Since 1986, I have been talking about adding value to coffee, but you're talking of 36 years ago.
Before some of us were born.
Before many of your audiences were born. And you are talking about it, and it's like you have just dropped from heaven.
And you can't even remove the husks from the coffee bean.
You can't.
After 36 years.
It's like you dropped from heaven. So really, I think as the people, we need to become more demanding.
He claims that the people he consulted to do the work failed him.
No, you see, that's what I'm saying. Everybody, every organization, every country, every community, even a household fails on account of leadership. Now, the responsibility of leadership cannot be shifted. Now, if you look at this country, you could look at, say, in different places, there are people who are leading. Some organizations, there are schools that are doing very well, there are companies that are doing well. But at the aggregate level, you need a president who can lead and a government that can lead and could get it, and they are able to create a narrative that as I mentioned, that narrative demonstrates the opportunities of the moment, but more importantly, the possibilities of the future. And if you can't do it, you are basically failing. You'll go there and tell your stories, but it doesn't mean anything. Next year, you'll come and tell the same stories. Because I think I had mentioned much earlier when I was being asked, what do you think the president is going to do or say that is new? I said he can't do anything. Like on these commodity prices, he can't do anything, because for you to develop state capacity that is able to intervene when there are global and domestic shocks, that capacity is built over 10 to 20 years. Museveni and our government have not been able to do that. So as a population, we are under extreme exposure to any even small shocks, by the way. We are under extreme exposure.
Interesting. Yes. On that, I want to bring on Jacob. Jacob, the president, of course, talks about surpluses. He talks of milk, he talks of eggs, But in the address, he fails to give alternatives for these markets. But I would want to ask, what is government doing to secure these markets?
Okay.
In that case, Jacob was talking as government, or?
Yes.
It is.
You already said.
Let's start here. It is it is unfair to allow the conversations and accusations just fly. Let me start from where Ndugu Godbar has put it. I think we need to be honest to ourselves. The presentation of the president was a 3-hour presentation. In all honesty, you cannot call it a casual presentation unless you...
Is casual determined by time?
I'm going to speak to that.
Okay.
There is a statement, 32 pages of that presentation. In presenting that presentation, the president went into what is very common here in Africa, to be conversational, to be interactive. But Godbar should know
Conversation.
from his generation. It's this generation that does that the most. For us, we the young people, me and Andrew will not get conversation. We will be on the issues. But in Godbar's generation, the elders have grown up listening to their fellow elders for a longer
That
time.
is a misrepresentation.
I need to be very
That
thorough.
is a misrepresentation.
And when I go
absolute
home,
misrepresentation,
when I go home to Soroti, when Grandpa is speaking, he is going to take you around so many stories.
But this is a
This is how
president.
they were brought up.
This is the president.
You can't escape your nature. This is how they were brought up. They were brought up
He
in a
has adjusted
community.
into the problem.
No.
Yeah,
This
that's
is,
what it is, yeah.
we need to agree. But I would not have a problem with it if it has substance. And I've said 3 hours has a statement that was then issued to the public. So my position would be, in spite of his presentation capacity, was there substance? And I think Godbar has totally not discussed the substance. He has decided to allow us see that the president is also a good actor. And he was in literature class, if you remember, in Intare. He's a good actor. So presentation is not something he struggles with his audience. But now, on the issues themselves.
He was acting.
No, I'm saying that in his presentations, he will not be boring. He will find a word or two that fits for the audience to have a good laugh, but also to relate with them at their level. But
What is their level?
we are young people. Godbar. I want to speak to the issues. And you're maintaining us in the theater. I don't want us to leave the theater and we go to the issues. The issues that the president presented. I'm listening to my colleagues here, and we are saying there was no issue. Sarah is calling it storytelling. Godbar saying there was no solution. It is complaints about the problems. But the consistency of the problems among our population starts with the information we have. Just understanding the dynamics of our reality as people who exist in this borderline called Uganda is critical to our actions. And that has been a consistent problem. When you listen to political actors on both sides of the aisle, whether there are some political actors in the NRM and especially the opposition, you see that there is a very small understanding of the land area itself, but also of the reality of our existence here as Ugandans. Not just as Uganda, but also in East Africa and Africa as a whole. Most of our problems are shared.
Jacob,
The president,
you're philosophizing.
No. The president has belabored. You will have time. The president has belabored to explain to us the areas that we must focus on.
For 36 years. When will you
Yes,
focus on
and
them?
we even need more time. Because if you insist, Sarah, if you insist on an opposition that does not see the value of pacifying a region, there are very few political actors in the opposition that supported moves like pacification of Eastern Congo. If you have an opposition class that does not see the value of that, then the lectures need to go on in just the understanding of why we need to act in the unity of a peaceful coexistence. So I think that is not a small issue. And if you're talking about Godbar, if you're talking about preparing for shocks, I think the first instance is for the information to be at a basic minimum of understanding what are the core facets that you launch on a development agenda. And I think that's something that the president has consistently done. And if anything, even if you called majority of the opposition leaders in Uganda today to TV, and you had them, even if you call them to this show and you had them, you realize that we still have a big way to go with just basic understanding. So I do not think that it is idle talk. I don't think it is casual talk. The president has gotten a new style of casual dressing, but I don't think casual talk is something you can put to his name. Secondly, I have listened to our conversations about the shocks that we have, the economic crisis and so on. Well, yes, Uganda might be experiencing shocks, and there could be for reasons you've said. But is it why, are you saying that there is no country in the world which has prepared long enough? We are at the third world level, and it doesn't matter how well our politics and our democracy works now, getting out of the third world level is not going to happen in 5 years or in 10 years. But there are countries at the top of their game, so it would seem.
How many years will we need?
No.
Because we've been around for 60. How many more?
How many years would you say the US needs because they're having pump increments? How many years would you say Britain needs to be able to prepare for shocks that you've called shocks? Because Britain, Europe is in quagmire. These are the front runners of the world, and yet they are also saying there is a big crisis and problem because of the issues in the world. So how much more the people that are at the bottom of the food chain in the world? So I think
do they have leg room to intervene?
I think I would want to.
I imagine they do. But what I'm saying is that even with leg room, even with resourcing, even with their capacity in education, where they have reached in population quality, they have still not adjusted to the shocks the way Godbar says. So I do not think that you can blame us Ugandans for not being able to absorb, I don't know what you mean by absorb shocks in global economy. But even if we are able, my elder brother Godbar, we are not immune. And I don't think there can ever be a country in the world that is immune to global phenomena. As long as there's still a push in globalization, there is going to be an effect here. Now, to return to the question, I thought I needed to first make a response.
Which he says he will also want to react to, but first
of course,
conclude,
yes. And I think if you remind me, the question, forgotten it now. Because
we can take the point that Jacob has said.
I want the question. Because I really wanted to have this conversation on whether fasting was serious.
But then
let's respond to this. Yes.
Because you see, Jacob, you are misleading our audience. When we say capacity to absorb shocks, to respond, we are not talking about being immune.
True.
Capacity to absorb and respond is not immunity. No, it means that you are actually affected. But when it happens, you because of the capacities that you have invested in, you have built, you have a toolbox of options that you can touch
to mitigate.
And I'll give you an example. So if you think of this country right now, yeah, I agree with the president that you may not touch fuel prices. It's a bit difficult. It's complicated. You may not, you may not reduce taxes, as he's saying. Although, if you had built a good economic structure, a good economic infrastructure, actually you could touch the taxes. But I think that as a country, for me, as a parent, I've seen, for example, one of the areas where Ugandans have been stressed is the whole area of school fees. Yeah? Paying school fees. There are schools which tell you that only about 3/4 of the children have reported to school. Simply because, and not because there has been so much increment of tuition, but because parents just cannot afford. So in other words, if you've built your reserves, you've built a strong economic structure, you may actually ignore the taxes, you may leave the taxes, you may even increase them. You may even leave the fuel prices to play on the market, but then you find that in the area of education, we can intervene. In the area of healthcare, we can intervene. In the area of increasing production, we can deploy money to get people into production. So in other words, I guess the point I'm making is that building capability as a country expands the range of options that you have when you have these shocks. And I think that, we have to be, I actually think that we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. We have to be impatient. This continent must become impatient with ourselves. So that speech that you talked about the president, if you go and audit it, probably 3/4 of it is explaining why we have not moved. 3/4 of that speech.
I was going to make that point next.
Yeah, it's explaining why we have not moved,
So
why we are
can
where
I
we
now
are.
conclude now that you have
Okay,
got the
let's
question?
Karamagi come in, then
Okay,
you have,
okay.
yes.
Yes, I accused you earlier of philosophizing, and here is why. My barber had his barber shop collapse because of electricity tariffs. If you drive around Kampala today, you find stores, especially in arcades, that have padlocks on them because people are not breaking even anymore. These are the people who have children in school. I've seen, there was a story that has run about medical equipment for mothers in public hospitals, the shortages and so on. And then we saw the nurses going on strike because the payments due to them were not getting to them.
COVID allowances.
Yes, and related payments. Indeed, you do not fatten your cow on market day. You don't wait for market day, then you start feeding the cow. You start before. So, a country that prides itself in having more than 70% arable land, but does not have grain reserves, silos. Country that cannot withstand a fuel shortage for 3 months, a month, or 6 months. There's a whole report by the Energy Ministry on the status of the fuel reserves. They're rusted. The parliamentary committee members went there and found rodents living there, rusted, so that even if fuel was brought, it cannot be stored in those reserves.
And some were rented out.
At Ginger. Now, some are being rented out. So, these, for me...
Jacob Eyeru may be one of the beneficiaries.
So
what he's talking.
I don't think so. I know.
So, Jacob,
That's right.
this is the situation in which many Ugandans are living.
Yeah.
Ugandans are living hand to mouth in that very literal sense. We on this panel might not understand what it means, but it's...
Are we privileged?
When
I am the only one who is not privileged in this one.
when you pay for a...
When you are speaking for government.
When a lady approaches you in traffic jam, Jacob, listen, when a lady approaches you in traffic jam with a basket of bananas, and she has left her child on the pavement at the risk of being run over by vehicles, and she asks you ask her, how much is this bunch? And she says 2,500. And you give her 3,000 shillings, and she cries. You tell her, keep the change. And you've given her 3,000 shillings, and you see her crying. This happened to me a few days ago. This is the situation of everyday Ugandans, living hand to mouth. Now, we can't have a government which collects all the money that it collects every day, also living hand to mouth. Because every other day you see this thing called supplementary budgets or classified expenditure. A thoroughly insensitive political class, including the so-called head of state, who is procuring new vehicles purportedly because the current fleet is not usable. It's understandable that the head of state has to be secured, but weren't we taught to cut your coat according to your cloth? For me, these are the issues that a State of the Nation address should tackle. When you begin philosophizing about Africa, Uganda's geostrategic, geomilitary position. You see, we are between Congo and Kenya and South Sudan. We need to be. Those things do not make sense when they are the immediate question of basic survival. This is where we are. You guys are telling us that we are now in middle-income economy. When your own central bank has told you that less than 1%.
Andrew, the guys arrived without informing us.
Maybe you arrived. They're informing us that less than 1% of the population is earning a million shillings and above. And you know, we're in Uganda, where a million, the word a million sounds big. Convert that into a currency like the US dollar, and you will see how terribly we are doing as a society. So, Jacob, for me, the shame I feel when I travel to the village and men old enough to be my father, women old enough to be my mothers are asking me for not 10,000, because you see, giving 10,000 is easier because it's a significant sum. But this woman is saying, if you give me 1,000 shillings, my son, I am going to buy kerosene, I'm going to buy some cooking oil. That is her range of possibilities.
30 minutes praying for you.
That's what you should be addressing, not politicking, not philosophizing, not taking us round in circles about geo-military affairs and whatnot, and the threat that is on the East African region, I don't know, because of some nebulous forces. Yeah.
Jacob, you want to respond?
Damian, you see, I can talk about that, but that would not be talking about the state of the nation. It's not a priority. That would be talking about microeconomics, which I'm going to discuss here. When we talk about the country, all that can get worse when you don't handle the macro issues. Yes, there is a beggar on a road, and it's very painful. I've sometimes been drawn to tears myself with that experience. But if you reduce your perspective on national development to that single individual, you will not make strategic direction possible and available. I'll give you an example. Today in the country of the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, I was with one of their special ambassadors, and she was saying 1 in every 9 women in the Netherlands cannot afford sanitary materials. If you think about it, it's definitely sounding like a lie. But it is a micro issue when you can meet that one person. Their status is a very disturbing position. If you define the country by that one person, you may miss all the progress. But also, if you plan for that one person, Jacob, you have let me finish. If you define the country based on that one person or those 10 people that you meet on the street every day, you will, yes, have empathy, but you will not solve the bigger direction and movement of the country. No, I agree, there is a problem.
One person is too many.
There is a problem when you say in a country which is entering lower middle income status, only less than 1% earn above 1 million. That's a very big inequality problem. That problem is not going to be solved by the political class looking at what do we do for beggars, what do we do for... It must be a concrete macro approach that is able to build income at household levels such that someone can fight for their own.
What should my Baba do?
What should my Baba do? And I want
my Baba,
as you heard from Godbar. Number one, in an economic crisis, you have to take prioritization that saves the economy and progresses it. For example, your Baba is suffering from high power tariffs. That could have a big contribution that's coming from government.
Again, for me, I'm talking about failure of leadership, because excess production is not an emergency.
Yes,
you know,
buffer stocks.
Yes, you have invested. Yeah, you know that people are growing things in this country. Even the government goes there and gives out seedlings and everything. So you can, if you are an organized government, you know when the excess will be there and where it's going to come from. Me, as an individual farmer, as an individual coffee farmer, I have been expanding my coffee plantation. I am opening up farms with other farmers. I can project, when I go just to my spreadsheet, the small one, I can project how much coffee am I going to be producing in the next 2 to 5 years. Now, in the 5th year, when I have 50,000 tons of coffee, I can't start complaining that I have excess. Because if I cannot plan on what I'm going to do with this coffee, then I must be having a problem. And that is exactly the problem I'm saying of this government, that its inability to think strategic, act strategic, plan and solve problems. Then you are here, hey, milk now is a lot. But if you are giving people cows, including even distributing live animals, people are not just going to the market to say, let me go and buy cows and rear them. In some cases, the government says, we are giving you cows.
People add to them in slaughter and process.
So where if people you are giving people cows, you know that there is going to be increased milk production. In any case, you can actually know how many people have cows and how they are producing. You can know how many people have sugar cane. Sugar cane there, you go to Bunyoro there and see how people have been suffering with cane. This is not rocket science to be able to say every farmer is registered as their sugar cane. We know Sarah has 4 acres, Godbar has 20, Jacob has 100. We know the acreage of sugar cane. We know the maturity period of sugar cane. We know when it's going to be harvested. So this I mean this mediocrity about to excess, and we are now have excess. So it's okay. Now we can start worrying. Shows you the deficiencies in the planning, and the deficiencies in the planning are deficiencies in leadership. So the president needs to own up. He should not come and explain us. And let me make one last point. I don't like President Museveni always externalizing a problem, because he externalizes everything. Oh, when there's excess, the problem, Ugandans are a problem. When he does this, he says Africans are asleep, but he's an African. He's a Ugandan. So this whole thing of externalizing, the patronizing attitude of a president is a killer to society, by the way. When you patronize people, you are basically undermining their ability to innovate and to do things in the way they should be done. So he is part of the problem.
Just to build on that, Damien, you know, we had the agencies like Coffee Marketing Board, Rent Marketing Board, Cotton Market, whatever, before the NRM distortion came in. These agencies were in charge of so many things through the cooperatives, for quality control, for marketing, for production, and extension support to the agricultural workers. So when NRM comes, the slogan by then was that they must cut the roots of UPC. So they had to destroy whatever they thought was a legacy.
The economic organizing
UPC.
that existed.
Yes, of UPC. So we still have shares like the Coffee Marketing Board press in Bugorobi. The Public Accounts Committee of Parliament went there to check the status of the press, and they found people cutting and dismantling a processing plant for coffee. And they asked them, who are you? Why are you destroying this thing? He said, we have been sent here. There is an agreement to be signed tomorrow. But the people who are in that agreement have told us to dismantle. So the informality and the deliberate efforts that NRM went through to destroy the basics of markets that you are now talking about, of production, of value addition, of marketing, produce, We are still heavily reliant on agriculture, like before, because majority of our exports, other than the gold that we smuggle into the country, still agricultural products are the biggest foreign exchange earner for this country. But where is the infrastructure? People are on their own. Then when you want to come in, you want to come in at a thagare level. Say the seed is 18, the best seed, it must go to Vinci. It is good now Ugandans know who Vinci is. This woman, and even in the agreement, you say she can sell green beans. So,
Yeah.
so really, where is the deliberate effort for building a national economy, a resounding national economy with the structures, with the clarity, and maybe to add for emphasis, because we discussed this. At the time Vinci was introduced into coffee, Uganda had withdrawn from the International Coffee Agency to deliberately create room that the coffee farmers are cornered and they must deal with Vinci.
Yeah.
So does this really show?
It's staggering as you have put it.
Yeah.
Yes.
A conspiracy
Yes,
by
yeah.
It's quite something that a government can conspire against its business community
It's people.
and
It's
against its,
not
against
only
its
the
people.
business community,
Yeah.
against its people.
So one of the things when his turn comes, my brother Jacob, that I'd like to understand, in this country we have many offices and institutions. We have a central bank. Central bank is in charge of monetary policy. The central bank is supposed to maintain price stability, ensure the value of the shilling, control inflation, keep it within single-digit figures, and so on. We have something called Ministry of Finance, planning, underline planning, planning and economic development.
They are now implementing.
We have something called,
private
there's a ministry, it has a state minister of urban planning and development. We have in the intelligence community, there's people who look at economic intelligence.
Economic monitoring.
Economic monitoring. Actually, I think there's a whole minister for economic monitoring. Now, you know that your country is located along the equator, which means you have 2 seasons, harvest seasons. You know you have arable land. People are producing. Then, in your speeches, 96, 97, I think 98 there, I was in P4, P5, I used to hear about something called silkworm. When I got to P6, then the story changed to vanilla. Then from vanilla, the other thing, there's PBID, Presidential Initiative on Banana Industrialization, something like that. The things that happened in those years was that when people would hear the president signal that the next big thing is this, everyone runs to it. And obviously, when demand outstrips, when supply outstrips demand, you have a price fluctuation, the prices drop. So the promise that you had made that if you invest in vanilla, you're going to earn, that promise vanishes because the forces of demand and supply are working as they should in your so-called free market economy. How is it possible that a government with these institutions cannot foresee that we've pushed people to go into this line of production? This is what is obviously going to happen. How can a surplus of maize become a crisis that we have?
But when there is famine in Karamagi.
Yeah, and by the way, the surplus is in the Golden Triangle, the place where they collect taxes from Jinja, Wakiso, Kampala.
Yes.
But you go to other places,
in the outside.
kids are stunted.
By then, Andrew, I was going to in the last few days, the price of posho has been going up like crazy. I'm like, but where is this surplus?
So where is the
Where does it? Yes.
how is it that all these institutions in intelligence, executive, ministries, and what have you, fail to foresee such things and intervene to regulate prices and so on? That is what I would like you to enlighten us about when your turn comes.
Okay. At that point, we need to have a short break. And out there, thank you for following this conversation. We are streaming live on YouTube, Civic Space TV. Like, comment, be part of the conversation. We're also on Twitter, Chat Show UG, and Civic Space UG hashtags on Twitter. Facebook, we are streaming live also on Instagram and TikTok. We have some posts and videos that are shared there. Let's have a short break and return. Welcome back from that short break, and we are still here analyzing the State of the Nation address. I've been joined today by Godbar, Tumushabe, Sarah Bireete, Andrew Karamagi, and Jacob Eyeru, who are helping us make a in-depth analysis of what transpired from the address. You can join this conversation. It's on our YouTube, like I told you, Civic Space TV. You can join this conversation on Twitter, hashtag #ChatShowUG, and on Civic Space TV hashtags. You'll be part of this conversation, and let's have your thoughts. Let's hear from you as well. Into the discussion, and where we ended from, it was a little heated, and we are still having the heat in here, and that is what defines our space here at Civic Space TV, where ideas have to flow at all levels. And I need to invite Karamagi Andrew. From the address, the president talks about, talking about Uganda having surpluses, because I'm much more interested in here. But that feeds into our foreign relations. While he goes on, he doesn't talk about which countries really we've signed bilateral relations with that could help absorb some of these excesses that he talks about. What is the game plan in here?
Before I delve into, I think because of time, let me use two examples of export agreements that we have with other countries on certain products, and whose treatment then helps you understand why we're talking about managing surplus by talking to other countries is really is disingenuous of General Museveni. So you have the one we all know, all Ugandans, most of Ugandans, the African Growth Opportunity Act, popularly known as AGOA, an initiative that was set up to say we want to increase Uganda's export earnings and a couple of other African countries by opening up the American market on friendlier tariffs, on textiles, but on friendlier tariffs to allow us to export more. You can obviously you can make the connection between textile and agriculture, because cotton and other plants, cash crops that you grow, can be converted into textile, into different forms of textile. That project succumbed to the usual disease that General Museveni likes to lament about. That's one. The details are...
And it benefited a range of African countries.
Yeah, it benefited many.
Including countries
Those
like
that
Kenya,
reorganized
which import our cotton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, we have this one is open, it's an Afro-Caribbean pact. It also takes with the EU, it opens markets to the EU on beef, and
it's called EBA.
EBA, yes.
Everything but arms.
Yeah. It's really a broad, range of, but you have companies along the value chain, those that take in and process these materials, complaining about quality, which speaks to the value addition that we've been told long before some of us were born, and that is still the same song. We still talk about amounts in terms of quotas. We do not fulfill our quotas. Let me end with a third example that speaks to the military adventurism we've been engaged in the Great Lakes region. We fight the wars. Our brothers and sisters in Kenya go and set up the banks and investment companies. We go and pacify, quote unquote, Somalia, stabilize South Sudan, invest in, now we're even building roads in the Congo. But you have no local Ugandan investors whom you hear about expanding markets into those countries. I'll give a random example. Aga Sekalala of Ugachik, I think, if I'm not mistaken. This is a company that should be of national pride. Like the way you hear people say LG, Samsung. These are homegrown entities, but which are struggling under the weight of the tax regime we've discussed, tariffs, electricity prices, and harmful competition from outside the country. So now connecting it to your question, the comments he has made about trying to seek markets are not borne out by the actions we see on the few opportunities that we already have. In fact, we see a conspiracy against Ugandans expanding into those markets. The only market where perhaps we have, the only export market where we have an edge is in exporting our young people as labor to the Gulf. But when it comes to food and other things, we are edged out by harmful competition. You go to any supermarket of your choice, people have sung this song for years now. No one can take action about it. I don't understand the connection between putting up a fruit factory in Soroti, where my brother comes from, and then you keep allowing...
Is it operational by that?
And then you allow products from other countries producing the same, selling the same fruits. Finally, Ugandans will relate to this. KFC has intrigued to see the packaging saying made in Kenya. The paper, does Uganda have a shortage of paper? Our brothers and sisters in Kenya rejected the idea that KFC could not buy potatoes from Kenyan farmers, and government came in to actually support that Kenyan position. Here, as has been said on this panel, and I agree, we are on our own. So those comments about market integration, market penetration, expanding our markets and so on are disingenuous. They are not borne out by the facts. There's major contradictions when you see the gap between practice and what they say. I will poke the attention of Ugandans to look at the question of fish farming, which has, like everything else, been militarized incredibly. That first, there were rumors about selling acreage of the lake, and people thought this was preposterous. But when you see the cages now, the growth, the amount of, and then something that happened, I think early this year, around trying to block export of, is it the Nile perch or the Nile tilapia or Nile perch? Nile perch. That this one should not be produced for local, for the local. It should be only for
reserved for export.
So even when you want to do something positively, you simply invert it and put it upside down. The only time you're exporting against your citizens, the citizens that you lead. So for me,
the best should be reserved
I can't understand
for
what we're doing here. The best should be reserved for foreigners. I don't understand what's happening here.
Interesting. And Sarah, I'd want to invite you. The president makes a good case, of course, on trying to block export of raw materials. But because he kept saying that, why don't we have everything done in here and add value to everything locally here? But do we have the capacity as a country so far? Have we seen this happening, including on the budget allocation? Do we see that there is a substantial amount that is being allocated for innovation, for...
You know, yesterday we asked MPs on the budget and accountability committees on whether, for example, we have money in the budget for the solar-powered pumps that were being talked about in the State of Nation address, and they are nowhere in the budget. Our beginning...
The MPs you talk to are from the opposition.
But the budget is a document of Parliament. It's an output of I know, I'm sure, yes.
I don't need your help.
Yeah, so when we said we are discussing, first of all, the State of Nation address is not proper. It is like a story. It's a State of Nation address should be a pointer. So this is what we are going to do, and the details are in the budget. And you should trace them.
You can,
Yes. So, but what we are debating is something different. And that is just one example. So when you go to the question of, you know, our infrastructure was distorted. We had infrastructure that needed a simple finalization to complete the value addition chain into agricultural products for export. The coffee processing plant in Ugorovi, the rint factories, the tea factories, Now tea factories are beginning to re-emerge through private efforts.
Yeah.
So we had all this infrastructure laid down and then completely slashed down by somebody who likes singing value addition since 1986. So where is the infrastructure for value addition? Where is the capacity?
Even she's bringing.
An investor with no money, a bankrupt investor.
Is
A
bringing.
miracle worker. I think she's a miracle worker. An investor with zero money.
but the
Where
president-
Ugandans must invest in
The
her.
president told you she's a savior, so
Miracle worker.
hey, Jesus Christ is arriving in town anytime. Huh? Hey, you're joking.
So we have, I think as Ugandans, since we are on our own, we need to sit down and say, what is the structure of our economy? Where do we have comparative advantage? How do we need to progress as a nation? And what actions do we need to do? Because the leadership in this aspect is zero. We need value addition. The developed countries are making all this money. So what have you been doing in short, in 36 years? Jacob said he has been doing sensitization and there is a need for more sensitization. So he's a motivational speaker. He's a president, a motivational speaker. Really?
But if he was, he didn't succeed.
Of course, he doesn't even motivate, because if he was, then he would motivate production. So economies must be organized. Production, movement to the markets, and how the quality, the product, which products are you taking to which market? If we have excess of milk, I know I come from Ankole, where normally excess of this milk is talked about. But how many malnourished children do we have in Ankole itself that need the help of Mwana Mujimu?
Stunted.
Yes.
Bushenyi, by the way.
Of course.
Our district.
I mean,
Yeah.
yes.
Sarah doesn't look like a product of stunted children.
But the statistics are clear. You have famine as of we talk today in Karamoja. Why don't you take milk to the children?
Actually, Sarah, if you don't mind, I would really build on that point. Because for me, that's where I see a crisis.
Let her conclude, then you.
He can come in
yeah,
as
yes.
information and
Now, I was going to say, I just wanted to build, just by way of examples, that one, I have been talking to some of the colleagues in the Ministry of Finance, and you see the distortions that are so glaring, that from 2012, when we adopted the coffee development strategy, government adopted the policy of providing seedlings to farmers. And that meant that UCDA would buy seedlings. First of all, UCDA would support farmers, nursery bed operators, to produce seedlings. And then it buys them, it gives us who are growing coffee. So recently, these guys come with their thing called PDM, the Parish Development Model, because they don't have money. Traditionally, they move money around. So they pulled money from UCDA, the money for buying seedlings, and put it into Parish Development Model. But you see, Parish Development Model, this is something that is just beginning there. They are even still figuring out how to do it. So essentially, UCDA does not have money to buy seedlings for us who are growing coffee. And on the other side, nursery bed operators are suffering. They have nowhere to put the seedlings.
You had told them
So
start.
you basically look at just a small distortion that can disrupt an entire chain in terms of coffee production. And you ask yourself, but these guys, what goes on in their heads? These, normally in public policy swings are one of the most disruptive actions that the government can do.
So when you look at our data, as I conclude, just the recent UBOS report, our people living below poverty line have moved from 8 million to 12.3 million. 1 in every 5 Ugandans cannot get 6,000 shillings a day. You have the people connected to the national grid dropping from 22% back to 19%. You have an increment in the people employed in agriculture from 64% to 68%. And these are the people whose businesses collapsed, who lost jobs during COVID. And then you come to make a mockery of the people that you've entered the middle income status.
Interesting. And Godbar, do you feel you supported enough as possibly farmers to that end to say that, okay, at some point we can add value to some of these products, especially for you who is in the coffee business?
No, really, for me, I've been growing bananas, matoke, since like 2008. Then I went into coffee. In the matoke, in around 2000 and yeah, I had a banana plantation that I had actually bought around 2000. Then in 2008, it was attacked by banana wilt, systematically decimated. Even when I reported to the district, there is no single person, whether an extension or a political leader, who came to look at my banana plantation. For me, I was astounded by the fact that there was no response at all. So in other words, you are basically on your own, and you know you don't know how to deal with banana wilt. Of course, and you see, when like banana wilt, when the plantations are good, they have been looked after very well, the effect of the wilt is much faster. So I sat there, I saw my banana plantation disappear over 2 years until it was finished.
It couldn't be checked.
No, it couldn't. At that time, we didn't know that you even had to do sanitation. Because right now, you control it by keeping on cutting the ones that are affected. But at that time, we didn't know. So it was, and you know, it even transitions. It starts from Kabaragara. Then it goes to Bogoya, before it goes to the traditional plantain. So the banana plantation was completely wiped out. I had to now put the land under fallow, grow millet and beans and what. So I was able to replant in 2015.
8 years later.
8 years later, because I wanted to make sure that if the thing is soil borne, maybe it has disappeared. But now, of course, the wilt is still there. But now we know how to manage by just applying sanitation conditions. Just cut every plant that is affected. So that is one experience where you don't see government, whether central or whether local. I went into coffee farming. I planted the seedlings. Eventually, I was told, when I was expanding, I was told that I could get seedlings from UCDA. I applied. I wanted to plant 6,000 seedlings at one time. UCDA was, and by the way, let me explain this, because I think it's extremely important. So I was looking for seedlings. The question was, where do I find the genuine seedling operators? I mean, seedling suppliers. So I went to UCDA. They said, this is not the time for supplying. When I talked to one of my colleagues, he says I should go to, I think the place is called Chituza, where there is a research institute. That's where they do coffee research. A very, very good facility, by the way. When I reached there, the guys whom I found there said, no, actually, all the seedlings have been bought by UCDA. Yeah, so I am stuck. So one time I was one of my radio programs on KFM with my colleague Moses, and no, actually when I came from Chituza, that's when I wrote to UCDA and I said I need coffee seedlings, and there was no response. So in one of my radio programs, I talked to Moses. I said, but you know, you guys, you are saying you want to increase coffee production to 20 million bags by coffee export, actually. Then me, I'm here, I'm struggling to look for seedlings to plant. I can't find them. So Moses is the one who said, no, but talk to the Gambanogu at UCDA.
Talk to this
when
one.
I called, they said, no, you actually come. Tomorrow, you'll have your letter ready. Wow. Hey, so I went, and good enough, they had allocated me 2,800 seedlings. But you remember I needed 6,000. And so, but the opportunity there for me was that this letter had directed me to a genuine seedling supplier. So from that time, I have consistently bought my seedlings from this lady. And I pay for them And the stories about payment by government of these suppliers, I know it's not something I want to go into.
Yeah.
But secondly, which I think I have found much more disturbing, is the access to equipment, to agriculture equipment. So recently, my company, Eco Farms, we decided to go into what we call micro coffee farms. Because you see, you realize everywhere, Ugandans, households and Ugandan elites, they have land, but most of it idle. So the households, I have learned from my experience that an ordinary household in this country, including in Western Uganda, where they say people are aware of, has no capacity to establish an acre of coffee. The cost is simply prohibitive. How much you need to put in.
But the government is pushing for the 4-acre model.
Yeah, of course, it's good to have ideas, even when you don't know how to execute them. But I'm saying,
I also want to buy a plane.
But I'm saying that my experience is that establishing an acre of coffee is not something that can be done by an ordinary household. Now, so I realized, I said, but then we need to increase coffee production because we want to do a full value chain. So I wanted to just produce our own stock, so that if we are to trade, we would be adding on our stock. So in other words, we don't have a facility that does not have enough raw material. Yeah. So we need to do a nucleus. So we have our own nucleus now. It's 22 acres. So we said, let's now create a model, create micro coffee farms. So if Karamagi has an acre of land or 2 or 3, we enter into an agreement with him. Then we finance the establishment of the plantation. We manage it. We harvest the coffee. We process it. And we do profit sharing at the green bean level. In other words, we offload the entire cost of the investment, but also the management, which is also another difficult thing. We absorb it. Then when the garden starts producing, we do cost recovery. We share the profit. We've done now, this season, we've done about 30 acres of that model.
Interesting.
But what is interesting, there are 2 things that are interesting for me. One is that in one of the gardens, we had to uproot eucalyptus trees. It is 6 acres. You couldn't do it manually. So we're looking for a bulldozer to uproot these trees. So we had to hire a bulldozer from Mbarara. Mbarara and Tungamo is almost 50 kilometers. Yeah? So you hire a bulldozer, you are paying 1.2 million shillings per day. You hire a wheel loader that transports it. You are paying 800,000 shillings for a return trip. No, actually 1.6 million for a return trip. You buy fuel of 800,000 shillings per day. Now.
And how many does it uproot?
So 6 acres, it was able to do it in 3 days. But you really have to be there really pushing, because you're looking at your daily spending.
It's bleeding you.
It's bleeding you. If you don't do it, man, you are going to be finished. Then we needed to do water reservoirs on some of the farms. So you have to add there one day to do a reservoir here, the water reservoirs. So I learned, said, man, so this government that wants to commercialize agriculture
since 1996,
since 1986, maybe it has not even learned what it needs to do. But thirdly, so these micro coffee farms, I think it's like a model that we're seeing, like it can actually, it can transform even a district like Ntungamo. Because now we've said, over the next about 4 years, we should establish an estate of at least a minimum of 1,000 acres of coffee in Ntungamo. Yeah? That means we can do it in Bushenyi, we can do it in Mbarara, we can do it everywhere. Because I'm like,
so
okay.
You've used the Ntungamo as a pilot?
Yeah, we are using Ntungamo as a pilot. We have estimated that if we establish 1,000 acres of coffee in Ntungamo, at the minimum, we will be bringing at least 5 billion shillings into Ntungamo district every year. And you see, because these are farmers that we are working with, the money is going directly to them.
The farmers.
It's not going into traders, middlemen, and whatever. So I think that So but look, so what is the problem? The problem now is the financing. Because if we had the financing now, we have over 100 acres that has been given to us for establishing micro coffee farms. I think today I saw one of the best things that I have been looking for from government of Uganda. I want to try and see how it works. So Uganda Development Bank just published a call for financing proposals and focusing on agriculture, increasing production. I thought, and I was normally I read these calls, and I look at all the mumbo jumbo. I say I don't want to apply in these things. I think for the first time I saw UDB publish a call that looks reasonable. In other words, the things they're asking for, you see that these are the minimum requirements. You really want to make sure that the company that is applying has them. The fact that they are saying they can give even 3-year grace period. Because, by the way, I should mention that one of the other things, as I told you, I got this bulldozer, I went and did the water reservoirs. So all my gardens that have water on them have reservoirs.
So you are saying
But
that
the cost-
UDB is doing a good thing.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So
Yeah.
you are saying
Through
government
the
is solving
call.
that problem.
No, I'm saying it has issued out a
A
good
call.
call.
He's waiting to
Yeah?
see whether it works.
Now,
No, but that is part of the process.
No. You see, these
You
things
can
with-
find it's
Jacob,
predetermined.
we have seen them.
Yeah, that's
I
what the
under-
government
We have
does.
seen them. You can also go there and they put you in a wild goose chase for
Yes.
the next
Yeah.
1 year.
Yeah.
And the recipients are predetermined.
Yes. Yeah. So look, I have the water across all these gardens have their water reservoirs. When I tried the irrigation infrastructure, I was for the two nuclear estates, which is 22 acres. I was asked 300 million shillings to lay the irrigation infrastructure. Now, as an ordinary farmer, as an ordinary person, you have nowhere you can put 300 million shillings to irrigate. I can tell you, one of these days, I think we should take especially Jacob there. So you go to Ntungamo in the middle of July, in the middle of the dry season, and you see how the coffee trees are drying. You sometimes feel like maybe even next season I have nothing.
You know,
Yeah?
you know what I'm thinking about? The chair of Public Accounts Committee, local government, has been doing a countrywide tour to see the projects where government has put money. And most of the projects that take even is 800 million. So they've been taking them on private farms. And people who have never received any grant from government for picture moments. So I hope people will not come to your farm to pose for pictures.
That's a possibility. But
For
also,
accountability.
No, very quickly. Someone referred me to a project. It's called it's a World Bank funded project, agriculture project run out of Ministry of Agriculture. The agriculture cluster project. So when I asked the colleague at UCD, he said, no, talk to someone in agriculture cluster project. They have money for irrigation. So I connected to the person. The person came at the farm in Ntungamo there in the municipality. Then he started asking all kinds of funny, strange questions. Then after he had wasted my time about almost an hour asking me this and this, he says, but you see, our project can only finance up to 2 hectares. And I said, please, I just chased him off the farm. I said, I don't like nonsense. I am doing 22 acres. This is a project funded by World Bank and government of Uganda, and you are coming to tell me that you can do 2 hectares because you are not an NGO. If it was an NGO that says 2 hectares, I would understand. But government of Uganda that has said we want to increase coffee exports to 22 million bucks. I said, I chased the guy away. But every time I keep on thinking, I say, I think that this guy must submitted his report. Probably he gets money for doing work at Tariko Farms.
interesting, Godbar, and maybe this is where we are, as like they were saying, it's more of a rosy speech. And interestingly, that the government always gives timelines that by this year this project should have happened. By this year, we'll have kicked off on this, and we've seen this don't happen all the time. But I need to shift off a little the economy and get on to issues on human rights. We've just had the Universal Periodic Review, the UN. And of course, all human rights people and defenders were hoping that about this time, the president would talk or make a statement on how far we've gone in response to the UPR process. But we didn't see this happening. Where are we as a country?
Is that question to me? Okay. No, I think in this particular instance, in the recent months and weeks, economic issues have overshadowed many issues in Uganda. And as you have noticed, even human rights abuses have reduced in the country over the last few months. I think we peak human rights challenges as a country during political contestation. And I think it speaks to how our democracy is not yet fully developed. But it really is something that I think the president has made himself clear on, made a public declaration of what is right and what is wrong. About whether overzealous actors in the country and the state will not respond in that way is a different situation. And I know my brother Andrew here has often made the analysis that you can argue that the president is taking with one hand and giving with the other. That's not where I want to speak from. I want to speak from what is already plain and what is positive for running with. So for me, yes, there's a universal peer review at the UN, but economics has overshadowed questions of, I mean, even COVID. Internationally now, COVID is not the biggest conversation, but it is still, in international terms, recognized as a pandemic. So I think that's the reason. Yes.
Andrew, I'd invite you to.
Yes.
Do you think it's technical that he doesn't respond to some of these issues?
Okay. So, human rights violations or abuses, as we call them, for me, are essential to the survival of the incumbent regime. There is no human way to rule people against their will. It is necessary for you to torture, detain, imprison, intimidate, and do all these acts against citizens if you are a government like the one, and I use government very loosely, the word government very loosely, a government like the one we have in this country. I want to share, for the benefit of the audience, the structure of the state in Uganda. This is a study I'm doing, the structure and the means through which violence is controlled. Mm-hmm. You have the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Let's look at the executive only, just for purposes of this argument. You have cabinet portfolios, statutory authorities, you have law enforcement, you have the intelligence community, you have others like the DPP, and so on. You have the Uganda People's Defense Forces, Uganda Police Force, Uganda Prison Service, National Security Council. All these institutions exist and are given mandate in the Constitution and the laws that establish them. Mm-hmm. Yet we still see, and the Constitution even instructs them, to those institutions to behave a certain way. There's an article that brings all of them together, Article 221 of the Constitution, that says, in executing their mandate, these institutions shall respect human rights and freedoms in performance of their functions. I want to bring you a quote from Abucha, Mr. Abucha, Deputy Commander of the LDUs, who said, "We are not police. Sincerely, we shoot to kill. In the head." We have the security minister, who not so long ago said, "Police have a right to shoot you and kill you if you reach a certain level of violence." Abucha actually added and said, "We are here, we shall kill you, whether you are our friend, you are with us in uniform, but we get you stealing, we shall not spare your life. We shall take your life, and that's the order." People should know that.
LDU.
Yes, Colonel Abucha Felix is the deputy commander of the LDUs. Those statements were made over a year ago, but have never been recalled. He has not been reprimanded. He has not been sanctioned. In fact, others, like the one I'm going to talk about now, General Eyeru, have been rewarded and, in fact, promoted. We also have the head of state saying that the other day there was a fracas in West Nile where our young friend Bobby Wine was fighting with security people, and I think they beat him a bit. They said, I studied how he was beaten, and I found that the men had beaten him properly. This is the head of state talking about a presidential candidate. Now, there are several statements. I'll just read one more and then make my point. This is attributed to General Museveni at the nomination, where he said, "They are planning all sorts of stupid things to disrupt the election process, the ones who want to disturb our peace. Whoever tries it will regret. I am already president and want to come back. The ruling party fought to bring peace in this country. No one has more guns than us." Now, this is coming off the heels of estimated 54 people who were killed more than a year ago. We have no accountability. We've seen no one being prosecuted. And because, and I'm blaming us as well as Ugandans, because we have short memories, we ask a question like this, and it looks like human rights is something that has fallen from the sky. No, there is a train of events that we see happening. As he said, we are at the peak of political competition. But we also see things happening now before us. We are living in a country where we have 2 members of parliament detained for 9 months as of Tuesday this month. They've made 9 months. Alan Sewanyana and Mohammed Segirinya. The process that I laid out here, that's why I mentioned those offices, the Director of Public Prosecutions and so on. Those institutions have not sanctioned a file. These people have not had a day in court. There are many offenses for which you can be jailed for 9 months. Essentially, the 2 have been convicted indirectly. We have a judiciary that behaves the way it does. You saw the treatment of the 6 ladies, amongst them the Deputy Lord Mayor of the capital, and Susan Nanyonjo, a lady called Amoni, Anna Adeke, his member of parliament, being treated in such fashion where state attorneys misbehave with impunity.
Appear in court.
You know, to stand in solidarity, that you didn't stand in solidarity with your member of parliament.
You want him to be blacklisted?
So, for me, Damien, to answer your question, human rights abuses, and this is my last sentence on this question, human rights abuses are not mistakes. They are not violations. They are not aberrations that happen because of so-called errant officers who fire so-called stray bullets. It is necessary if you want to stay in power this long and counting, and to install your son, to treat people the way we are being treated. So I would that Ugandans stop looking at these as violations, but as necessary to the survival of the regime. And it's what we are seeing happening.
Yeah, interesting. Sarah, I know you would want to make some remarks on the issue of the human rights, but also I need to just bring the issue on health, that we are having some surges in the COVID cases, but in there we've seen quite a lot that was spent on COVID, including vaccine, trying to making our own vaccine and all this. But in the address, we didn't see the president coming out to probably give us the figures of now how many people are vaccinated, and more of what is the next steps for us to possibly fight the pandemic as it comes in the near future. We only just saw him towards in these last comments warning us, those that went to Namgongo, for not putting on masks.
Damian, before Sarah intervenes in this question, we saw how impossible it was to deliver food to homesteads in Kampala, greater metropolitan area. You don't know how many households are in Chigowa, for instance, because plot numbers are not defined. Certain places are not accessible. There's no urban plan that we follow. For the head of state, since we're discussing the state of the nation, to demand that they give figures on how many people have been vaccinated in a country that has not conducted a population census. I think we've missed 2 or 1, where data is not, there's no central, you have institutions like NERA and so on, but you can't explain it. Where the premier learning institution in the country does not know how many students it has. I'm talking about Makerere. I think that's a disingenuous inquiry from the head of state to ask about numbers when his own government does not know the numbers of the people that it leads.
On human rights, really, I think Andrew has done justice to that question. But I wish to emphasize that NRM is only keeping power using 2 tools, money and violence. You take away that 2, NRM is gone. And so to the question of, it's fraudulent really to keep referring to what was delivered as a State of Nation address. Because we should have had a section on health and what is happening, what money is allocated there, what innovations are being done, including the vaccine. If at all people really are in the lab doing research, what is the progress? How much more time will it take? How much more money do we need to commit as a country? So that did not happen. So we are discussing now something outside the State of the Nation. Storytelling. But the truth is that when COVID broke out, we thought it was an opportunity to really refurbish our health infrastructure as a country. But I'm sure, and I know the Auditor General has estimated about 40% loss of resources committed for COVID, but I'm sure it's more than that. People went into, I think it was a Thagare pandemic.
Right from
People are dying.
Right from State
yes.
House.
You have classified budgets during a pandemic, a health pandemic. It's not that it's a pandemic and you don't know the cause. Then you have security, trillions of money. State House, trillions of money. To manage a health pandemic. One would think that maybe we established a specialized hospital at State House. Because what was that money for? They had their normal budget running. Then they had all these supplementary budgets for COVID. What were they managing? Because their normal budget stayed. What would they have done if COVID had not broke out? They had money. So what were those supplementary budgets for State House for COVID? In trillions. Defense maybe to do the violence they did during lockdown. Maybe they needed more money for that violence. but most of it was squandered, and the Auditor General, really, health and security were the biggest entities that squandered COVID money. So we did not achieve the infrastructure that we thought we would achieve. Of course, the health sector has been in the ICU for most of the 36 years of Museveni's regime. We saw ugly situations of dead bodies being detained in private hospitals. Ugly situations of doctors dying because they don't have money and nobody can touch them. including the doctor that was heading the COVID unit at the Mbarara University of Science and Technology. Very unfortunate. You have a doctor, a frontliner, gets COVID in the course of his work, and you can't treat him because he has no money. Nobody can treat him. We still have medical personnel demonstrating for the allowances that were long passed by Parliament and spent according to records from finance. So where did their money go? Part of the industry action by medical workers is COVID allowances, shamelessly. When they come to Parliament, Parliament approved money long time ago for COVID allowances for medical workers. And nobody can explain where their money went. At one speech at the State House, the president was even, he unceremoniously left his own address after asking the PS for Harris on the number of beds. He ran out of words. At one time, even the Prime Minister fell off the chair. They are overwhelmed by their incompetence, by the corruption, by the lack of what next to do. And that is the leadership that we are discussing, falling off chairs and ceremoniously leaving your address because of the incompetence of your staff that maybe hold you hostage over something that you can't even reshuffle. That is the state of the nation in practice. So if today, I know there is an increase in COVID cases, God forbid, if we go back to the level that would require additional measures like the 2 levels we've been through with the lockdowns, we shall start from scratch to manage the pandemic.
Yeah, interesting. And as we tend on to our closure, I just need to request that each one of us gives us at least 30 seconds of their way forward on the lessons they pick from the State of the Nation address, especially for the future of our country. I'll need to start with Godbar here.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about so many things here. I think as I said, the State of the Nation address, I would have preferred something that is more solid, more that covers, yes, the nation, the economic, the social, the governance, the foreign policy. I think if I was to give Museveni credit, I think he made reasonable references to our foreign policy in terms of our engagement in the region. But also the fact that he explained, I think he said he explained to his colleagues, both in the West and the East, why they voted, or no, why they abstained on the Ukraine resolution. So I think if I was to give him credit, I would give him credit on the references to foreign policy. But on the other things, he really didn't measure up. But maybe I shouldn't say he didn't measure up, because he has nothing to measure to. Because normally in other countries which have been able to regularly, elect new presidents, you can compare a new president to how another one previously used to deliver State of the Nation address. So right now we can only compare Museveni with Museveni, and the comparison is not very impressive. I think the second, I really want to call upon Ugandans to really open their eyes on this coffee business, because the Museveni regime, right from 1995, when we promulgated a new constitution, and Ugandans said no, all these natural resources, wildlife, land, fisheries, minerals, petroleum, as resources that belong to the citizens of Uganda, and they are held in trust by government. So in 2005, as many of us were being consumed with the removal of term limits debate, these guys were able to smuggle in provisions in the law and expropriate the natural resources, especially minerals and petroleum. And so since then, we've seen deliberate expropriation of resources, of forest reserves, of wildlife, of fisheries. So right now, what they are doing is to say, we take away the coffee. At the end of the day, you realize that Ugandans were just squatters in this country. So I would want to really to call upon Ugandans, no matter our political affiliations, we need to take the coffee debate seriously. And I think I am going to be one of those coffee producers and farmers who is going to be mobilizing to make sure that this fraud does not pass. Because I know when you how some seven with his body language, you could say that he's ready for a fight. And I think Ugandans, we need to be ready for this fight to make sure that this coffee fraud that has been presented does not pass.
Thank you very much, Godbar. Sarah, as we go through.
Yeah, if you compare with about 5 years ago, the State of Nation address, the president used to refer to public debt, the donor support to the budget, and he had committed to making sure that donor support to the budget does not go beyond 40% as part of claiming sovereignty. But in the recent past, he's completely quiet about the burden of public debt, about the donor support to the budget, and the fiscal indiscipline of his regime. Just a few days as Ugandans struggle really to make ends meet with no mitigation measures. And maybe to add to citizens that Tanzania, which is, I know it is ahead of us slightly in terms of a stronger economy. Just yesterday, the president of Tanzania declared that she will continue to put 100 billion every month to mitigate the costs of fuel at the pumps. And of course, the cost of fuel in Tanzania has gone down from the time they took that measure. And she said she will do it so long as there is no stability in the international fuel prices to make sure the citizens are shielded from that burden. So it's not that the government cannot do anything. But it's just an insensitive government that does not care what the citizens are struggling with, and just cares about themselves. Just a few months ago, the president bought 2 very luxurious vehicles to add to his convoy. And in the same practice, then we saw the legislative arm also buying ceremonial cars that are yet to arrive in the country. They haven't arrived.
No, they arrived.
I see the spokesperson of parliament saying they haven't arrived. So I don't know which is which.
We can't believe the spokesperson of parliament.
Yes. No. So you are talking of an economy on its knees. You're talking about citizens losing jobs. The report from private sector out of COVID during the opening of the economy in January said 50% of their members had lost business. And some of the leaders of the entrepreneurs, some of them had died because entrepreneurship is a skill to an individual. So you have the kind of economy that is on its knees trying to recover, although now we have booked figures trying to stage manage a recovery. But just last month, Bank of Uganda announced the downgrading of the economy. So there is an extent to which you can cook figures to make empty pronouncements. But the evidence in the details of the economy, you cannot hide them. As we talk today, our exchange rate with the dollar is going towards 4,000. And that is evidence of the status of the economy. And World Bank has announced a recession, a global recession where all East African countries are mentioned as prone to suffer that recession, including extreme famine in Somalia. So we have all these things happening, and then you have a leadership in a carefree, casual mode with cooked statistics that cannot be traced anyway in the lives of the people. Ugandans, you're on your own.
Interesting. Karamagi?
If I was the president of this country or any other country, I would care about the things that we've discussed here, because that is what makes a state of the nation. It is the small and medium enterprises that make up the economy. These multinationals and whatnot are additions to, they should also find something that they base on. It's unfortunate that every time you discuss economy in Uganda, you're discussing when you look at banking and finance, for example, we have 7 banks that have closed, local banks. If you look at telecoms, we are underrepresented. If represented at all. Leisure and hospitality, taken up by international hotel chains. Agriculture, which is also now being ponied out to Vinci and Group. And so I would really concern myself with the issues that people think about when they go to bed. You, the viewer, there are things that worry you when you go to bed. School fees is a real issue in this country. And I don't have children, but I hear what people talk about in terms of fees, and they say, in Luganda, chiganye, echibalo techivamu.
Refused.
You hear about people complaining on the dollar, what the dollar is doing to the shilling. And there are investors for who are not going to clear their containers of product that they had imported. They've given up on it to say, I don't have enough money to buy US dollars, enough to afford to clear for this container, this product that I'm importing. The barber, whom I talked about, whose business has closed, he's not stealing, he's not engaged in any illicit activity, he's putting up a business to employ some other young people. This is the real definition of the economy, off of which you build. So those are the things that would concern me. And finally, there's a police report that says that there have been 329 deaths in 45 days between May 8th and May 15th. 411 accidents, 73 of these with fatalities. We've seen video footage of border borders being run over by trucks. By the way, the mass transit question in Uganda is another massive problem, and that you heard nothing about it. Only when they try to beautify something, then you hear a scandal breaking up about how the cost of the tarmac, the cost of this, we have the most expensive roads, and so on. So those are the things, and of course what Sarah has said, when you are struggling like this, you're telling us to tighten our belts, but we see you procuring new high-end vehicles for the executive and the legislature. It's a massive problem. So for me, the state of the nation did not fit the bill, and indeed, as Sarah has concluded, we are on our own as Ugandans. We need to take some of these issues into our hands and resolve this problem politically, because it's a political problem.
We're on our own. Yeah. Jacob, the final take.
Thank you. I think I'll spend a lesser time than Andrew here, because for me it's just to say that this country is very young in terms of composition, and young people must know that at an individual level you may not be able to determine everything, but your own capacity can determine something. As the president makes his State of the Nation address by constitutional mandate, we will never dictate what he says. We'll never dictate what his concerns in that address are. And as you've heard in our analysis here, it keeps fluctuating. What we can always dictate is how we respond to our issues as young people. And I am one of those that is very particular. I know that the president is very committed to things like the parish development model. And as young people, we need to unite our energies to ensure that we have our say. But in the case of the parish model, we have to also have our way in its implementation. Where our government is investing a lot of money, we must find our own room to benefit from that money, because it's very easy for the level of corruption. If even the president is saying that corruption has happened, he knows where it has happened, it has led to the death of an industry being created, but he does not have enough facts for prosecution. And lawyers will understand that. The other people will not.
Lawyers?
You know? Lawyers. And all these are all these are lawyers.
We don't understand.
So they are the ones who understand it best. But for us who are like for me from an engineering background, I don't understand what the president said.
Yeah.
But as a young person, I think that we need to be able to take matters in our own hands in terms of determining the trajectory of the country, especially on things that are of mass consequence, like how much money we lose in the economy to corruption. If you put that money, even, okay, let's say we reduce corruption in this country by 20%. 20% of money stolen for corruption in this country can do so much. If we went to a policy that can reduce by 70%, the lives of our countrymen and women can change. So as young people, we must be able to chart a different future from the challenges that the president seems to only say, Katonda Jari about.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jacob, Andrew, Sarah.
Even for the address on commodity prices, after 1.5 hours of saying of explaining the problem, he says, "I wish you good luck."
Of course, thank you very much, Godbar, for always giving us and being on humor in this conversation. The State of the Nation address, of course, gave a lot of promises like one would say, it was a very highly rosy address, and as Ugandans, what we only need to do is to watch out and see whether that was promised to be implemented in the next financial year shall be the things that we shall put hands on in the subsequent year. And for us at Civic Space TV, our own, and what we only do is to bring these ideas to you, provoke your minds, provoke you to take action and inform you and all the people that wish for change wherever they are. And from me and the crew, the TV here, we wish you the best of the weekend. May God bless Uganda.
Katonda Jari.
Katonda Jari.